All right, cool. So today we will be going over the reading portion of this SAT course. We'll be basically giving tips today and our like best strategies for you guys to work on yourself on the reading. So most of the reading classes will be like walkthroughs through practice tests and stuff, but today is going to be mainly a tips and like strategy portion of the course. All right. So our head tutor Maddie will be going over the presentation. Before we start, we ask you guys to fill out the survey just to see where you are at right now, and then we will get started. All right. So for everyone who just arrived, yeah, Maddie said it. Today we'll be going through our SAT course presentation. Today will be mainly like a tips and tricks thing, where we go over strategies, types of questions, how to approach questions. And most of the course for reading is going to be walking through practice tests and how to teaching you guys how to thoroughly analyze your mistakes. But yeah, Lasha, if you did fill it out before, we ask everyone to fill it out, even if you filled it out before, because we start when everyone fills it out. So yeah, just go ahead and do that. And then after that, our reading head tutor Maddie will be going over the presentation.
Alrighty, so looks like everybody has filled out the survey. Let me switch over here to the presentation. You should see my screen now. So as Engad said, my name is Maddie. I'm one of the reading tutors. And I'm going to be kind of going over basically the types of questions that you're going to see on the reading section. Quite a few of those types to go through. Then we're going to go through passage types, and then finally strategies. So that's the reading questions. One thing that's really good to know is that on the SAT, there is going to be two basic types of questions. You're going to have your big picture questions, and you're going to have your detail questions. So one thing that the test tests you on is being able to zoom out from the passage. And
to interrupt, but no one can see your screen.
Nobody can?
No.
Ay. Okay, 1 second. I thought I was sharing it. It says I'm sharing it.
Now they see it. Now they can see it.
You got it? Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right. You just want to restart, maybe?
I will. Do you want me to restart?
Yeah, you should probably restart.
Okay. So let's go back. Reading tutors, me and Engad. And the types, so we're going to go through types of reading questions. We're going to go through the passage types, and we're going to go through strategies. And as I was saying, with the reading questions, there's going to be basically big picture questions and detail questions. So those are like the two main types of questions you're going to see. And what it's really testing you on is your ability to zoom out from the passage and understand kind of the general landscape of the passage, and then your ability to zoom in and understand super small details. So it kind of tests you on that ability to shift back and forth between the two things. With big picture questions, I may have missed some, but there was two main ones that I thought of. The first one is the questions that ask about the main purpose of a passage, the theme of the passage, or the central claim. Again, for these, you're going to have to be able to zoom out from the passage and be able to simplify what it has said and summarize it. So think of it as trying to just create like one sentence, one short, simple sentence summary of the entire passage, which would include the main point. So with those type of questions, you're just going to need to be good with that sort of thing. It could ask you for the purpose of the whole passage, or it could ask you for the purpose of just one paragraph or line. So pay attention to that. And lastly, with that one, keep in mind whether the question's asking you for the purpose, the theme, or the claim, because there's kind of a slight difference between those things. The purpose would be, what is this passage intended to do? The theme would be, what is this passage about? And then the claim would be basically the main idea or thesis of the passage. So that's the main purpose questions. The second big picture question is the focus shifting questions. So those ones, they're going to be like, over the course of the passage, the focus shifted from this to this, from what to what. So you're going to have to be able to see the entire landscape of the passage and kind of blur your eyes to the details of what's happening and just see those main outlines of how the passage is flowing. Okay, that is the big picture questions. We're going to go to the detail questions now. There are 5 different types that I thought of for that one. The first one is intent questions. So they're going to ask you stuff like, what's the purpose of saying whatever? Why did the author choose to say this? What was the effect that he wanted to bring out when he said this? When he used either this word or when he said this phrase or something like that. Second one is the paired evidence questions. I'm sure that I'm not calling that the right word because I think other people call it something else. But it's basically where the 2 questions are together. So you have the first one has the answer to the question, and then the next one is like evidence. For those ones, I feel like a lot of people hate these, but honestly, you should think of them as the College Board's gift to you because they are actually super, super helpful. Because the thing is, normally, if they ask you a question about a detail in the passage, you're going to have to look through the entire passage to find it. But with these, you have 4 options, and all you have to do is just check each of those options and find the correct one. So it's almost like they're giving away the answer a little bit, if you think about it like that. So I like those. Often I'll be doing the test, and I'll come to kind of a hard one, and I'll be like, "Oh, I hope this one has, like, a second, like, evidence question with it," and then it does. So with the harder questions, they'll often give you the evidence, questions, and that's super helpful. Third one, is vocab questions. So with vocab questions, something that's super important to remember is that you don't have to memorize vocabulary for these. That's absolutely boring, and it's just not gonna be fun. SAT is supposed to be fun. I believe it's fun. So don't memorize vocabulary. It's worthless. What you have to do for these is what you have to do for the entire section, which is read. Like, if you read a lot, if you're steeped in books and words, you're gonna know what words mean. And then the test really just tests your ability to use context too to understand words. So even if you don't understand all the words, you're probably going to be able to figure it out just with the context. The fourth one is inference questions, where they ask you, like, what can you infer from this statement? Or what can you infer from the passage about this thing? So with these, it's really important, even though it's saying to infer, it's not asking you to make anything up. So don't make anything up. That will hurt you. The answer is going to be in the passage somewhere. So there's proof there. You just have to find it. And these ones also will often be paired evidence ones. So that's really awesome, because they're going to give you some help with that. Lastly, for the detail questions, we have questions that refer to maps, graphs, and diagrams. So I honestly don't like these because, like, this is a reading section. Come on, guys. Anyway, they're there, so we have to deal with them. So just remember with these that this is all analytical. So have your math brain on, even though you're in the reading section. With these ones, they're going to ask you for data that supports the passage. So they might say, like, does the data in this graph support the passage or does it not, or stuff like that. They're going to ask you for details from it too. So just be able to read maps, graphs, and diagrams. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so the second section is the types of reading passages. So as you guys probably know, there's 5 passages. I almost forgot for a second. There's 5 passages on the SAT. They're gonna have the first one is always literature, and then it kind of varies from there. You're gonna have 2 science passages, 1 social science passage, and then a history passage. And if you look at point D on the slide, there is going to be a paired passage. So that means one of the history or science passages will have 2 passages in it. So there are 2 shorter passages, but they often ask you to compare things. Anyway, let's look at each one of those. So the first one is literature. I honestly love that they put literature first because it's a story, so it's super interesting, and you can it helps me relax at the beginning of the test because it's not like all crazy. Well, sometimes it can be pretty complex, but with the literature passage, you want to focus on interactions between characters. So the characters are the absolute most important thing. The questions are always going to be centered around the characters and what's going on between the characters. So it's really important to clarify to yourself, even as you're reading, like, okay, there's this guy, there's this girl, they have this aunt, and just keep that straight in your head because otherwise it's going to be super confusing if you don't have that straight from the beginning. So they're going to ask you about what the characters are thinking, how they react to each other, etc. And that's basically all you need to know for the literature. Science and social science, I put them together because I couldn't think of anything to say for social science, so I thought, well, let's just put them together. The focus on these is going to be like scientific information and experiments. So they're more analytical. All of this is analytical, but they're probably the most analytical of all the passages. Um, Honestly, like, they're probably my least favorite passage, but the thing is, even though I don't know tons of science, I can still make it through them. Um, and that's a really important point to make is that even if you don't understand lots about science, even if you don't understand lots about history, the passages are going to tell you what you need to know. So you don't have to stress out about not knowing certain things. All the information that they have there is all that you're going to need. And then just your skill, your ability to understand something that you read. That's like the most important thing. Another important skill for these passages is just getting past the technical jargon. So they're gonna say like names of stuff that you don't even know how to pronounce, and that's totally okay. Like I don't ever pronounce stuff right when I'm doing the test. Like sometimes I'll just make up some weird name for it just to be able to remember what something is. So the important thing is to differentiate between things, not necessarily to like be able to pronounce them. Just be able to know what thing is what and what it does, basically. Okay, there's gonna be a few special types of questions in science passages. And one of those is they're gonna ask you how the scientist in the passage would respond to another scientist's new findings. So they're gonna say, if this other scientist found this out, how would this person respond? They're gonna have And they're also gonna ask you the last thing they're gonna ask you is, like, the structure of the passage. So, like, do they start with a hypothesis and then move on to an experiment and then talk about what they learned from the experiment, or how does that flow? So pay attention to that as you read the science and social science passages. Okay, history. History's fun. History's kind of confusing sometimes and difficult. But something to remember for history is its main focus will be persuasion and argument. So it's going to be a person from history, usually like a letter or a speech, and they're going to be arguing their case for something. So it's important when you think about your goal, when you step into the history passage, it's to understand what is the argument, what's their main point. And if you understand that, everything else is going to flow from that and it will make sense to you. One other little thing about history passages is that there's going to be like old sounding language. Um, So that's a little confusing sometimes if you haven't read a lot of books from like older times. Um, but if you if you're able to translate from that old sounding language into your own language, not like another language. Sorry, a phone is ringing. Um, if you're able to translate it into simpler English, then it's going to help you a lot. And I think that's probably one of the biggest skills that would be great to have for the SAT reading section, because if you're able to take something that sounds kind of confusing and then figure out quickly what it's basically saying in simple words, that's a huge skill. That's very, very helpful. And it's something that I use in every single test that I do, every single passage that I do. Lastly, we've got the paired passages. So these ones will just come up with history and science, like I said before. Um, and with these, it's really helpful to collect your thoughts at the end of both passages. So don't just read the first one and go straight to the second one. Take like 5 seconds. They're going to be really helpful seconds. Take 5 seconds and tell yourself basically what that first one was saying. What's the main idea? Then once that's in your head, it's going to be really helpful for you when you hit the second one and you have to figure out what that one is saying while keeping the other one in your head. So, sorry, there might be some noise in a second. Anyway, um, let me see. The second thing with that is it's just going to ask you the special questions for the paired passages will talk about differences and similarities between the passages. What was different about one? What did this person focus on that that person didn't focus on? And it's going to ask you if they agree on certain points. And that is basically all the passage types. So we're going to move to strategies. This is a fun part because I really believe in my strategy. So the biggest point I want to make today is the importance of preparation. So with this test, you're not going to be able to improve incredibly in, say, 2 weeks of just doing practice tests. The way you really improve in this test is consistent reading over a long period of time. So, and I know people say reading articles is fine, but like books are always better, right? So I'd recommend reading books and reading them consistently. Another thing with that is often people will be like, oh, I gotta read, so I'm gonna read like an hour a day, and then they basically end up not reading at all. So even if you just start with like 15 minutes a day, it's gonna be very, very helpful to you. And the consistency is key. So you'll find that you improve and improve as you go on reading consistently. If you're looking for book recommendations, I'm sure that SkillSurge will have some people on it um, who are avid readers and who will give you some recommendations. Um, but apart from that, I really think you should make sure that you don't feel like there's a specific book out there somewhere that will be the key to your success. It really honestly doesn't matter. All you have to do to find a good book um, is to read something that interests you and then something that challenges you just a little bit. If it's interesting, you're going to keep doing it, which is really helpful. If it's challenging, at least just a little bit challenging, then it's going to help you to um, to improve and actually get better instead of just reading at your regular level. And you can also pick books that are kind of, say you're struggling with history, you could pick a book that had history. You could read the Federalist Papers; those are really good. Um, so anyway, yeah, reading is the most important thing for this reading section. Not just going through the passages, not just doing practice questions, actually reading a book is what's going to help you. Because for me, like, I did pretty good on the reading section, and I didn't really have to study for it that much. All I did was I've just read a lot all through high school and before that. So it really pays off. If you're a reader, like, this test will not be that hard for you. Okay. As far as when I actually come to the test and I sit down and I'm about to take it, my strategy is pretty simple. I basically just do everything in order. I'm not the person who does the history passage always first and then jumps to the literature and then jumps like I think that's honestly really confusing and not helpful. So I just do everything in order. I do the passages in order and I do the questions in order. Um, that way I don't get confused and it can get pretty crazy with bubbling if you're jumping around too. Second thing for strategy, always remember to read the blurb for background information. They're gonna have little blurbs above every single passage that tells you like the author, a little background information, the title of the piece, or something like that. And it helps you just get a head start on what's gonna come at you, so that you can more quickly acclimate to whatever they're saying. Thirdly, it's also helpful to underline while you are reading the section. And I really like to do this, but you have to just remember not to underline too much because then you're gonna end up at the end with like the whole passage underlined, and that's really not helpful. So make sure to just underline the main points, or maybe you could circle the names of the scientists that you know will come up in the question, so you can make sure you don't confuse the two. Um, just make sure to underline, but not too much, so that it's not really like messy and crazy when you go back to the passage. The fourth point is really, really important, and I think I think people do this. I don't think I'm the only one. Um, just remember to have a conversation with the passage, and I'm not saying to like talk to yourself about if you disagree or agree. I'm only saying to, as you're reading, to be active, and it really helps you stay active to talk to yourself like this. Um, talk to yourself in your head about what's going on. So I would read like maybe the first paragraph, and at the end, I'll just say super like super succinctly and summarized. I'll just kind of remind myself, okay, this happened, and then I'll keep going. And they'll be like, okay, this and this happened. And then by the end of the passage, I kind of have a general idea of the landscape of the passage. And I can tell myself quickly and like in a few words, in simple words, what's going on. Um, I think that's really, really key, especially for the big picture questions. Okay, another tip for the strategy would be to just spend more time on the passage than you spend on the questions. Um, often people will rush through the passage when the point of this test is to basically understand the passage. The questions test you on whether you understood it. So you should obviously be spending more time making sure you understand so that when you move to the questions, they're not just going to throw you. Um, so really, don't be afraid to kind of go um, through the passage at a slower rate than you think you should. Of course, you should spend about 13 minutes average on every passage to make it in the time. But with that also, like if you go under, you're gonna go under on some passages and you're gonna go over on others. So it kind of all averages out. So if you're on a paired passage and you're spending a little more time, don't worry about it because it's gonna even out. Um, lastly, for my personal strategy, just always remember to be objective about this section, even though it's reading. Um, it's it's not an English class. It's not a class where you need to bring to the table what you think about something or add in previous knowledge that you've learned about things. All you have to do is take the information, understand it, and spit it back out in the questions. So it's basically really, really analytical. So I always remind myself when I'm starting the test, I'm like, Maddie, you are a machine. Like, don't even think about your feelings right now. You're not even human. Like, just focus on information, understanding it quickly, and answering the questions. So remember to be objective. Okay, and that is my strategy, but of course, other people have other strategies and they've been successful with those. So I don't want to like just talk about mine. Um, I feel like for some people, I never had issue with timing. So people who have like major timing issues, I've heard that some people will try to do like the easier passages first, um, just so because they know that they'll get more right in those, and then the harder passages that they won't even get to, they won't have to struggle through those harder problems. But I'm not sure if that's super helpful just because of the bubbling issue. It's going to be confusing that way. Um, if you do have timing issues, I think there's always a balance between like should I spend only should I rush through every single passage so that I can get to the end, or should I spend more time on the passages and then just miss a couple at the end? I think there's a balance that you have to take between those two. Maybe spend a little more time on each passage, and then if you get to the end and there's 5 questions left, that's fine. We can talk more about that if you have more questions about that. There's people do various things to try to cope with the timing issue. But I think a good rule of thumb is simply to just not spend a huge amount of time on any one passage or question. So if you come to a passage that's just really, really hard and you find yourself spending like, I don't know, 20 minutes on it, maybe move on, maybe just bubble in random answers and then come back if you can. Same thing if you're spending like 5, 7 minutes on a question, every single question is worth the same number of points on the reading section. So maybe move on from that hard one and get more easy ones right so that kind of makes up for that, if that makes any sense. Yeah, so that's basically it for what I had to say. We're gonna have you ask questions if you guys want to, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. So you can go ahead and ask some questions now, and then we'll do a survey at the end as well. Okay, I am here. I'm reading the chat now. I'm not sure if I know all you guys because I was I was on Discord a while ago, but not anymore. So I don't know if I know you guys or not. Ria says, "Do you recommend reading the questions before reading the passage?" I honestly wouldn't recommend doing that. It just takes up time. Um, like I said, I like to just go through the passage, reading it, and then go to the questions. Then they will make sense once I hit them. Um, yeah, I don't think it's worth it because it just takes up time when you're gonna be looking at the questions again once you finish the passage, and it'll just make more sense once you've read it. So that's what I'd say about that. Bubbling strategy? Oh, that's a good question. So what I ended up doing, yeah, I think what I ended up doing was I just bubble every single question. I don't know how good that is. That's what I did. I didn't wanna get confused with which questions I had done and just confuse myself. So I just, like I do a question, I bubble. I do another question, I bubble, like that. Just just the most simple way so I don't confuse myself because I am easily confused. Literature and history passages, you mean, like, by annotating, do you mean, like, actually writing words down on the page? If that's what you mean, I mean, I never did that. I think that takes up too much time. My method would be to tell myself it. So, just give, like, a short summary, like, "In this experiment, this guy thinks that this is bad," or "This happened," or whatever, whatever. Just a really short, simplified summary that I'll say to myself. Yeah, I wouldn't write the summary down. Like, it would just take up too much time, and plus, when I'm taking the test, I'm so nervous, like, I don't think my writing would even be legible if I tried to write it down like that. So, I would definitely recommend the underlining part, but not the annotating. Unless you just wanna put, like, one word super short, like that. Go ahead and ask any more questions if you have them. Bubbling strategy, um, it's just like some people would say that they were just gonna bubble on the bubble sheet, they're just gonna put in answers after they do every passage. So they'll put in all 11 of their answers at once instead of doing it after every single one. I think that's the most common one besides just doing it after every single question is they'll, like, do it passage by passage. I'm not really sure which is faster. I honestly don't think it's that important. Just make sure you don't get confused. Um, yeah, make sure you don't get confused. 'Cause if you bubble in, like, exactly off like, if you bubble in off 1 all the way through, it's really bad. Yeah, I don't think it makes too much of a difference. I'm not used to writing SAT. Okay, so do you mean, like, you're not used to taking the test and bubbling in your answers? Okay, yeah, I would also just print off the test sometimes and not use the bubble sheet, but I think it's if you haven't done that a lot, I think it's really important to get comfortable with it. So, definitely next time you take the test, print off the bubble sheet and practice with whatever strategy you decided on, practice doing that so that it kinda becomes natural, so that when you come to the test, you don't freak out because 'cause you've never done that thing before. Also, um, I'm pretty sure everybody still has to wear masks during tests nowadays, so it can be good to practice with that too, just to be comfortable wearing a mask while you're taking the test. Just when you're taking tests at home, just try to simulate the real event as much as you can. Yeah, that's true. I'm not at school anymore, so I forget. Well, if there's not any more questions, and God, can you put up the survey? And if you still have more questions, even as the survey's up, like, go ahead and ask me. This is the time. Also, I'll let you guys know, you probably already know this, but the next session that we're doing for reading, it'll be next Friday, and we'll just be going over, some actual passages. So, that'll be really fun. I'll basically read I'll basically read through it, um, talk about it, kind of let you guys see how I think through the passage, and then you'll answer the questions and we'll look at those. Alrighty, well, thank you guys so much for coming. It was super fun, and I can't wait to teach y'all some more next week.